From the Red Sea, the great multitude continued their journey, which would take them to Mount Sinai. The Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians 4:25, "For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia." The traditional Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula was identified as such by Helena, mother of Constantine. This Roman emperor, who converted to Christianity in 312 AD, claimed to have had supernatural revelations and visions, some of which revealed to him the locations of several biblical events. He sent his mother Helena to the Middle East, where she pointed out the locations her son had seen in his visions. Then in 527 AD, the Emperor Justinian built the monastery of St. Catherine's on the northwest slope of Jebel Musa in the Sinai Peninsula. On the site, he claimed that Helena had erected a small church 2 centuries earlier. The identification of this mountain rests only on a dream of a heathen convert who sent his mother to identify the mountain based only on his description over 1,700 years after the Exodus. When Ron found the chariot remains in 1978, he knew that the real Mount Sinai was in Arabia, just as Paul had written. He applied for a visa to enter Saudi Arabia and go to Jebel el-Lawz, the highest mountain in the rugged region along the eastern shore of the Gulf. But after 4 years of silence at his request, in January of 1984, he and his sons entered the country illegally by walking across the Jordanian border. Hitchhiking and hiring taxis, they made their way to Jebel el-Lawz. There, Ron saw enough evidence to know he had the right mountain, but his excitement was soon dampened when a Bedouin in a pickup truck hastily drove up and told their driver they had to leave immediately for the border. When they arrived at the border, they were arrested. The charge: espionage for the State of Israel. Over and over, Ron explained why he was there, and late one afternoon they took him in a helicopter and told him to show them where he believed the great multitude crossed the sea. He directed them to the beach directly opposite Nuweiba, where he could clearly see from the air. They landed, and close to the helicopter was a Phoenician-style column, still standing, with inscriptions in archaic Hebrew. The Saudis made numerous photos, chattering excitedly, and Ron explained that he believed it was erected in ancient times to mark the crossing site, and told them that he had found an identical one on the opposite shore, whose inscriptions had been eroded away since it had fallen in the surf. That column probably saved Ron and the boys' lives. It was the shred of evidence that gave his story credence. But it was 78 days before they were cleared of the bogus charges, which Ron later learned were phoned into the Saudi embassy by an acquaintance who had once worked with him on several projects.
3 weary Americans came home Monday night. Ronald Wyatt and his sons Daniel and Ronald Jr. returned to Nashville at the end of an amateur archaeology expedition that landed them in a Saudi Arabian jail. They entered Saudi Arabia illegally, searching for the site of the biblical Mount Sinai. Ronald Wyatt and his sons are with us in the studios of our Nashville affiliate WTVF to tell us all about it. Gentlemen, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Mr. Wyatt, you there in the middle, and
yes.
Your sons on either side. Why did you, I didn't know that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabian territory. Why did you think it was?
We found some chariot parts that looked like the chariots found in King Tut's tomb in the Gulf of Aqaba, west of this Jebel el-Lawz. We found these at depths from 60 feet out to 200 feet and over a stretch of about 1.5 miles. And we believe that that was the crossing site. And so in the biblical narrative, they arrived at Mount Sinai after crossing the Red Sea. The language in the Bible indicates that they stayed in a mountain, enclosed in a mountain. So an aerial map showed that this Jebel el-Lawz had a large valley enclosed in the rim of an ancient volcano. There's about 5,000 acres in there. We felt this was the place. And in Exodus 24:4 and in Leviticus 6:28, 11:33, and 15:12, it tells of some artifacts that were to be found. There was to be 12 pillars of stone and an altar and some pottery. And so this is why we looked at that particular mountain.
Now, I know that you applied for a visa for about 4 years. It's very difficult to get into Saudi Arabia, and they turned you down, but then you decided to make a quick, and let's ask Daniel this, we'll give him a chance to talk, a quick jump across the border in Jordan and go in illegally. Did you think you could get in and out without being caught?
I don't know.
Gotta take
It seemed kind of risky to me, yeah. I didn't think it sounded too easy.
Ronald Jr., why do you think they let you go, finally?
I'm not real sure. I guess they just found out that we weren't spies as they thought we were.
They thought you were Israeli spies, right?
Yeah, that's what we hear.
Any torture, kind of interrogation?
No, they just separated us and made sure our stories matched.
Yes. During the interrogation period, we were interrogated by 3 separate groups, the Coast Guard and then the local General Investigating Group and then from the ministry. And the Coast Guard interrogation was a very frightening experience for people that were totally inexperienced with spies and intrigue and all of this.
Are you going to go back?
We're not going back without the proper papers.
The Wyatts, thank you very much for joining us from Nashville this morning. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
The Coast Guard is in charge of customs, and they were the ones that arrested us. They took us down to their Coast Guard headquarters, and we met some people there that were quite friendly at first, but we found that they weren't all this friendly. We went through some 3 different periods of interrogation, and the first was by this Coast Guard group. They had a general there that was commanding this, and he interviewed us or interrogated us through an interpreter. And I've never yet been quite convinced that the interpreter told him
what you
were saying. Right, yes. But anyway, after that, then we were interrogated by the General Investigating Office that was in charge of that area. I think their office is in Tobuk. And then after that, they sent some people out from the ministry. This is the kings from Riyadh, you know, the seat of the government, and had a few questions for us too. And during this time, of course, they kept us separated so we couldn't get our stories together or whatever. They didn't tell us a whole lot. We were held incommunicado. They declined allowing us to talk with a representative of our government, which international law requires that they do. And so we were pretty much in the dark. They would, after the preliminary or the main interrogation, periodically they would take one or the other of us up to this head honcho's office and ask us a few more questions. And I think they were getting these questions from their archaeology department. They were seeing if we really were archaeologists or if we were Israeli spies, which is what they accused us of being. Well, in Numbers 24:4, for the people in the audience that are Bible scholars, it says that Moses rose up early in the morning and set up 12 pillars of stone and erected an altar. All right, we felt that this would still be there because people in that part of the country, the Bedouins and a lot of these people, their agreements, instead of being on paper, they set up these little things of stone, which apparently they have some means of interpreting what these little stacks of stones mean. And so all these things are left alone. They're not necessarily sacred, but they are just things that, you know, people do not bother. We felt that there was a high likelihood that those stones would still be there, and so we found those. And they appeared to be intact. There had been some sand blown in over up partway on the north end of the altar and some of the stones on that end.
Soon after arriving home, Ron received a call from a Saudi Bedouin prince by the name of Samran. He had heard about Ron's claim after his release and had become obsessed with seeing what he called Moses Mountain. Moses is recognized by the Muslim faith as a true prophet. Ron even flew to Nashville, determined to convince Ron to return with him. And finally, 11 months after his release from Saudi prison, Ron relented. In March 1985, Ron journeyed to Turkey to show a new associate, David Fasold, the site of Noah's Ark. Ron joined them, and the three viewed the remains of the Ark in the snow. Ron was then provided a visa to enter Saudi legally, and Mr. Fasold was invited to join them, an offer he did not refuse. With a full work crew and provisions, they went to the mountain where they thoroughly explored the area. An archaeologist from Riyadh University was brought in and verified the archaeological value of the site. Ron was asked to stay and excavate, but he had other meetings in Turkey which couldn't be changed. His refusal angered the Saudis, who were not used to being told no, and all their photos, film, and video were confiscated. Ron was told they would be returned to them when he returned and excavated as they had requested. After he left, the area was fenced off and signs erected stating it was an archaeological site and trespassing forbidden, but once again he left empty-handed. He began to make plans to return as they had requested, and met with former astronaut James Irwin to enlist the participation of his organization. But future requests, both by Ron and Colonel Irwin on his behalf, were met with refusals. With time to reflect upon the situation, the Saudis had decided it was not in their best interest for Mount Sinai to be in their country. 3 years later, a member of Jim Irwin's organization, along with one of their financiers, succeeded in getting into the country and getting some photos, having gotten complete directions and details from Mr. Fasold. They then made the claim that they had discovered Mount Sinai. But it wasn't to be long before Ron would have more documentation than he ever dreamed possible. The story is too long to be told here, but by 1992, the photos and videos he so desperately desired literally fell into his hands. However, for now, we must protect the identity of those who took the photos and videos and gave them freely to Ron with no stipulations. Exodus 14:30. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. The waters of the sea had closed in on Pharaoh and his army, and now many of their bodies lay lifeless upon the vast Arabian shore. As charioteers and horsemen, their swords and weapons were bound to their bodies and were gathered up by the unarmed Israelites. The mountain of God lay to their southeast, an easy journey through the large wadi just beyond the marker where Ron found the column in 1984. But had they proceeded directly to the mountain from the sea, they would have entered the large open plain and been an easy prey to the fierce warring Amalek. Instead, the biblical account tells of a different route through the wilderness of Etham, also called the wilderness of Shur, the mountainous region which surrounded the shores of the Gulf. For 3 days they followed the cloud through the barren wilderness. As their water supply grew scarce, they became fearful. Then they came to Marah, where there was a spring, but the water was bitter and undrinkable. The people murmured against Moses, blaming him, even though they were being led by the cloud and the pillar of fire. When Moses prayed for wisdom as to what to do, he was shown a tree by the Lord, which he was told to cast into the waters, and which made them sweet and drinkable. There are several springs in this vast mountainous region, but we cannot identify Marah with certainty. Their next stop was Elam, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. Palm trees are extremely rare on this side of the Gulf, but here, spanning across a wide wadi, is an oasis with hundreds of palm trees and 12 wells of water, still used today. The 70 palm trees have proliferated into hundreds, but the fact that there are 12 wells, which are today walled in concrete and still used in this extremely arid region, is very strong evidence that this was Elam.